ජීවත්වන් රැස්වීදෙන ජීවිතේ.
Kidney diseases have plagued villages of Madukare for many years. For 335 families that once relied on impure water, there's some hope. A water purification project by Gammadda. Gammadda, for the people, by the people.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
For many days now, Sri Lankans have been faced with one big question. They've been wondering about this question. They've been thinking about it hard and long, trying to find answers to these questions. And we as a responsible news organization also try to find answers or the answer to this very burning question that Sri Lankans have been having for the past few days. But today, of course, we can confidently announce that His Excellency President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has safely landed in Singapore. He is safe. But this brings us to the next question. What about us? What about Sri Lanka? What about the people who voted for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa? Has he resigned? There are reports circulating that his resignation has been submitted, but we are still waiting to receive active confirmation from the source that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa himself named upon leaving the country. The President, issuing a press release through the PMD, said that all communications of the President will only be made through the Speaker of Sri Lanka. However, the Speaker of the Maldivian Parliament has made an announcement saying that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has resigned. However, based on the release issued by the President himself, we are only to believe what is being said by the Speaker of Sri Lanka and not by the Speaker of Maldives. So as of now, we still do not have confirmation on whether or not President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has resigned. To speak about, to answer this second question that we have now, now that we know that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is safe in Singapore, to answer the second question as to what will happen to us, we have on our show today parliamentarian Eran Wickramaratne, former State Minister. Mr. Wickramaratne, what about us?
Well, the country has to now elect a president, because if it is confirmed that he has sent in a letter resigning, then there is a vacancy, and then the Prime Minister is only acting as a president. So according to that particular article in the Constitution, to elect a president, Parliament has to be summoned. And Parliament has to be summoned, within 48 hours, and it will be summoned. It has to be summoned by the Secretary General of Parliament, and then he will announce that the President has resigned, and then he will call for nominations and fix the nomination date. And if we assume that the nomination date is fixed for 48 hours, that means assume he's resigned today, then there's an acting president, the Prime Minister becomes acting president. Let's say Parliament is summoned, let's say on Saturday, he gives notice tomorrow, Parliament is summoned on Saturday, and then nominations might be called by Monday. And then he can decide by Tuesday, right? If there is one person nominated, then he will be the president of the country for the unexpired period of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. If there is more than one member, there will be an election, and that election can be on Tuesday, and then the issue about the president will be resolved. Meanwhile, because what has happened is, if that vacancy has arisen and the Prime Minister is acting president, then the Prime Minister shall appoint an Prime Minister or an acting Prime Minister. So that's the thing that can immediately follow, and it can even follow tomorrow.
Mr. Wickramaratne, in these uncertain times, Sri Lankans are looking for certainty. And on the 9th of July, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa came and announced, okay, I will bend down to the people's mandate and I will resign on the 13th. He didn't say I will resign immediately, I will resign on the 13th, is what President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said. However, people were waiting throughout the day on the 13th to see President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation. First, the Aragale protesters said, we want to see the resignation before 1 p.m. We waited for 1 p.m. There was no resignation. Then there was a second statement that followed, that came out of the Speaker's office, saying that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa will submit his resignation today. But it wasn't submitted. When top officials in the government lie like this, and on matters at a time when our country is facing such a crucial moment, we're almost at the bottom of the entire global ranking of countries, as far as we are the epicenter of a global crisis. I believe that is what the Washington Post called the crisis in Sri Lanka, the epicenter of the global crisis. And remember, mind you, all of this is happening when there is a war raging between Ukraine and Russia involving modern-day military equipment. And however, we, Sri Lanka, a country thousands and thousands of kilometers away, is the epicenter of this global crisis. And the President, the Speaker of Parliament, seems it fit during the time that we are called the epicenter of the global crisis of the world to lie to the people, to lie to the faces of the people. Lies so much that even today we still don't have confirmation, a day after the President promised that he will resign. What do you make of this, Mr. Wickramaratne?
Yes, so we have had this protests going on for months, right? And then on the 9th of May, we heard that these peaceful protesters were being attacked, and Sajith Premadasa, myself, and Kavinda Jayawardena rushed there because we felt that these were peaceful protesters. Unfortunately, some of those people turned on us as well, and we had to run for cover. However, really we want to stand with the peaceful protesters. And then on the following day, led by Ranjit Madhumo Bandara, our General Secretary, and 3 of us, went and met the President. We explained to him that if he were to bring the amendment to the Constitution restricting his executive powers, that will really stand him in good stead in terms of his legacy as the reformer. And also there is a way of a dignified exit, and that's what we expected. And we spent 2.5 hours. I explained it to him in detail. In detail, I explained it to him. He said at one point, do you want me to go in 2 weeks? I said, no. In 6 weeks, we bring it into Parliament. We vote on it in Parliament. Referendums can be held, I said, with a general election later. But then if Parliament has voted for it, the country knows we are serious about making the change. And then we can discuss, you know, when you will exit. And this was tried. And he didn't understand that, and I mean, there's nothing more we could do. And then he went for these other arrangements, thinking that he can bring in a new prime minister and maybe safeguard his position or whatever. So we have gone through that, and ultimately, right, instead of going that route, right, people had to all come on the street. And then he was forced out and he had to leave. Now this thing about the delay, you know, he said in the 13th he will be sending his letter in, right, and didn't send the letter, and I can only speculate here. I think the reason was because he was trying to get to a safe haven, and to getting into the safe haven he wanted to protect himself probably, and thought that he could be still head of state. Then countries, through international protocol and rules, have to basically provide him the security that is needed. And I think there was a delay because, as you know, even leaving Colombo had certain problems and delays. Then leaving from Maldives had certain problems and delays. And so that is the reason I think this has been delayed. And now there are media reports saying that letter of resignation or notice of resignation has come in.
There are reports that claim that this notice has been emailed. Do you accept resignation by email, Mr. Wickramaratne, in Parliament?
Yeah,
during the executive?
I would look at it in 2 ways. One way is I wouldn't like to comment on the legality of it. I will leave it to the legal experts. Right, but I would just look at it very simply. Yeah, you know, there is somebody who has a job. The person, for whatever reason, abuse of power or stealing or corruption or whatever, right, vacates his job and he leaves before he is taken in and then produced before the judicial system. And then he has gone. I mean, he's gone. And then he sends me an email saying, "Sir, I won't be coming back to my job. You know, I vacated it." Right, I would certainly accept that, right? And if he wants to come back, I'll get him arrested. You see, because anyway I'm looking for him. So I won't like to give a legal answer to that. I will leave it to the legal experts to give a legal answer, but I don't think we need to get caught up in the technicalities. It's over, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Mr. Wickramaratne, Sri Lankans have been mistreated by various governments, not just this government, but various governments that have come and gone throughout the years. Sri Lankans have been mistreated, Sri Lankans have been beguiled, Sri Lankans have been lied to, Sri Lankans have been pit against each other. And you yourself would have lived through many of these years where you were not a parliamentarian or a member of the executive or the legislature, but you were an ordinary citizen, just like any one of us. Throughout these years, that the Sri Lankan people have been insulted by their rulers. Where does this insult, the things that have been happening during these past few months, where does this insult stand?
Yes, it's very unfortunate what you are saying. Right, there is a social contract, and those who rule and those who are ruled, and that social contract clearly has been in favor of those who are ruling. And there are two sides to that. You know, one side is abuse of power, right, by those who have ruled, abuse of the law, abuse of the constitution, using powers that they don't have. That's on one side.
Right.
On the other side, right, citizens, right, have not stood up to it and really corrected the situation. Often the fingers are pointed only at politicians. I would say it's just not politicians. It's professionals at every level, you know, have to stand up to it. Whether it's a minister who is doing something wrong, right? Whether it's you know, it may be in the legal on the legal side or otherwise, right? That we should have been actually doing that and stood up to it. So this shows that the social contract changes. We are really a republic. In a republic, it is the people who are sovereign, and therefore we need to have some system changes now. Right? Everybody talks about system changes, but people haven't really defined it, and we've given it some thought, right? And we need certain system changes now, and that is the way we bring back dignity into the system. This idea about, you know, going and worshipping politicians, you know, giving them the front seat, you know, getting up when they come into a room, right? I mean, just treat them like everyone else, right? That is the way the system must be, right? That's the way. It's a republic.
But will you feel bad, Mr. Wickramaratne, if you are not accorded those pleasantries that were accorded to you before?
You know, no, I mean, I have quite the opposite actually. When I was the head of the bank, CEO, and I went up the elevator into the floor, and a security guard opened the door. Sometimes he saluted me. I had to actually tell him, no, you can't salute me, right? And then when I went and sat on the chair, people used to call me GM, right? And I used to say, that's not my name. Right, I used to say that, and the reason I used to say that is just to make them question. I said, just call me Iran, right? I can understand paying respect to the office a person holds. That I can understand, right? But I think we have taken this too far. We have taken things like protocol too far, right? And I think that we need to, these are cultural issues more than legal issues. Even these cultural issues need to actually change, right? Need to change. That doesn't mean that we don't respect the office that somebody holds, because we have put the person in that particular office. So I'm not taking away from that, but I'm saying is these things have to change, and we need systemic changes, right? So one of the things now that we need to do, we have an acting president. We need to get an acting prime minister quickly in place, right? Quickly in place. And then subsequently, we will have to get a more permanent president, right? And an election will have to be held in parliament for a permanent president. So those are like the immediate steps that we should be taking over the next few days.
Mr. Wickramaratne, just one final question before we head into a short commercial break. Now, this question was sent in to us by one of our viewers. The question goes, given that the president has resigned, or at least let's presume that the resignation has been submitted, is there any possibility of extraditing him and claiming assets of the president which are brought using money stolen from the people?
I think the question of extradition will arise subsequently when the legal process is being pursued, and legal processes will have to be pursued because people really want to have systemic changes. So some of the things, the immediate systemic changes are things like we have to bring back the 19th Amendment immediately. Cut the powers of the executive presidency. And bringing 19 back and getting rid of 20 is just the fundamental immediate thing. We go far beyond that. The SJB believes that we have to go beyond that and actually cut the powers of the executive presidency. We need to go to a more accountable parliamentary system.
So that corruption can be done away with.
Yeah, corruption is one thing, but there are many things that need to be done in the systemic change. So there are many things. So I would say one is that. Then we need to look at basically different people have different views when they talk about systemic change. I think, like coming around parliament and trying to think that burning down parliament and this kind of nonsense, right, should be done away with. What you should be doing is replacing your MP. That includes me. If you think that I'm not fit, I should be sent home. But burning down parliament doesn't help. So we need to be clear, what do we mean by this actually, right? And we need to send suitable people there. We have a national list. We need to have criteria for the national list. Right? Qualifications, criteria, at least for the national list. Because if you can't do that for parliamentarians, because it might take away a fundamental right of people who want somebody to represent them, that should be permitted. But even things like the national list should be looked at. Then if we are going beyond that, right, we might even want to look, maybe instead of the national list, maybe a second chamber, right, where people are there, which is a check and balance on the first chamber, right, in passing laws and and things like that. Then maybe we should look at the concept of a council of state. That is for people who don't come into politics, but there are youth. This Arugale has shown that youth have a voice, they have a message, they need to be represented in some way. So if you have a council of state, you can bring in the youth, you can bring in academics, you can bring in professionals, you can bring in activists who may necessarily not want to come into politics. And then that council of state could work in consultation with the cabinet on policies, on laws, in regulation. It is an effective way of citizens' participation. So these are some of the changes that are needed when we talk about systems change. And you referred to something, Charlene. You talked about corruption. Yes, one of the first things the new administration must do is basically put all the steps in fighting corruption. One is assets and liabilities of those who are coming to public life, right, as politicians or into high office. Not just declarations, it must be made public, so that if it is public, then Auditor General, auditors can look at it and see.
Mr. Wickramaratne, these changes that you've been talking about, we've been talking about it for a long time, but Sri Lanka is currently, these changes must be made, no doubt about that. I believe now more than ever, everybody in Sri Lanka will agree, and the pressure on the politicians is so much that they will have to even unwillingly agree to these matters to a certain degree. However, there are some burning questions that Sri Lankans need answered right now. There are some burning issues that needs to be addressed, because for all of these matters to be implemented, it will take a few months or maybe even a few years. But the bottom line is, Mr. Wickramaratne, Sri Lankans must be alive until then. We will cross over to this short commercial break and we will grill Mr. Wickramaratne on the answers that the SJB has for the real issues that Sri Lankans are facing right now in making ends meet every day. Stay tuned. You're watching Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
President Gotabaya in Singapore. UK House of Commons debate on Sri Lanka. India protests in solidarity with Sri Lanka. Protesters let go of the occupied state properties.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're in discussion with parliamentarian Eran Wickramaratne, former State Minister. Mr. Wickramaratne, like I said, the people are waiting for answers. The people are wanting a solution to these issues that they're facing right now, because people can't live, Mr. Wickramaratne. There's curfew being imposed every day, political instability. There is not even fuel available for the people. But just before we get into that, just to take off from what we were discussing before, the amendments to the Constitution, systemic change that you were talking about, is it possible for this process to begin at the earliest possible moment with the appointment of, well, for the time being, at least, Ranil Wickremesinghe as the acting president?
I think that this has to start at the earliest. This giving excuses won't help, right? So I was talking about assets and liabilities. The SEERBOC, that is the Commission on
to investigate allegations of bribery and
corruption, needs to be independent. The new law is there. It could be brought in. I mean, parliamentarians on both sides have to just raise their hands on that. Then you referred, Shalan, to stolen assets being held. We have to bring in a stolen assets recovery law immediately. Right? Excuses won't help. Right? Excuses won't help. These things have to be done quickly. Our excuse is often we are trying to get a law perfected, and as a result that we delayed for years and years. That won't help. People are demanding it, because you're asking about, you ask him about extradition. How can you even talk about that? We need to have a stolen assets recovery law. It has to be done. And then I would go even further. Right, and I would say that we need an independent prosecutor's office, because this has been shelved, and often we professionals try to maintain the status quo. That won't help. This has been a people's struggle. People want real results, and therefore that is why I have been talking about this over and over again. Right, I'm the minister, and the AG is the advisor to the government and to the minister. Then
how can the AG prosecute you?
That's right. I steal and rob, and then I expect them to prosecute me. There's a conflict of interest. It's not happened. The history of this country shows that it has happened. So be open to the fact that people who have stormed this city are telling us, be radical, be quick, and do it. But just to come to the question you asked, that the real immediate issues are like the gas issue. The gas issue for 3 months appears to have got sorted out. World Bank funding was given. Others have pledged into that fund, and therefore it is. And then
fuel issue.
We need to look at the gas issue beyond the 3 months and put some solutions there. Then the fuel issue, we need at least $400 million a month on the fuel crisis. Now, I believe that if you have a government that is acceptable to the Sri Lankan people, right? And then that government has a legitimacy. That government will be acceptable to the international community and the markets. The moment that happens, there's going to be a lot of goodwill. We are confident that we can go and negotiate and get credits on fuel to some extent, that we could ease the pressure. That is one thing that could be done. The other thing is, when confidence returns and Sri Lankans living overseas and working overseas, right, will begin to remit money back, which has really drastically fallen, and therefore getting a $200–300 million a month back is not an impossibility. So
this confidence factor, how much does it play in remittances especially?
Yeah, it can send the remittances up another $200–300 million, right? So it has, because it has dropped to that level, right? So I'm saying that there has to be many different steps. Then the other thing a new government can do is, as soon as the new government is in place, within weeks we can sign a staff level agreement with the IMF. That's a first step in going in that direction. That will give confidence as well, right? And then we had to look for bridging finance, because the IMF program will take time. It might take a few months to finally go to the IMF board, get approved, and when that money comes in tranches, that money will go to the country's reserves, and that builds confidence, and then it will be a positive towards our ratings. But we will then also, meanwhile, need emergency funding. And not just the IMF, even from friendly countries, some emergency funding will be needed. And then I think there is a recognition that if we have to take the more difficult steps in terms of reforms, right, that will have a burden, an unequal burden on the poor and the vulnerable. We have to cushion them through social protection. And I think everybody out there is sensitive to that. And I think we will get some support for that too. So there are several steps that have to be taken. One builds on the other. But the most immediate one is to have a stable government acceptable to the people in the country and also to the markets. And then once that confidence is there, lots of these things can follow. So I know it's very gloomy at the moment, right? But things can begin to change if we do the right things. And therefore, parliamentarians must build a consensus in immediately putting the first step, and which needs to be done probably in the next 24 hours, is to put a prime minister in place quickly, and let there be a consensus about that. That will show us the first step in stability.
Mr. Wickramaratne, are you sure that the current parliament, given its massive mismatch in what the people want and what the parliament want, you think you can derive a government acceptable to the country and to the world out of the parliamentarians that are currently available?
Yes, I think that, right, Parliament, as the mandate goes from 2019, has definitely changed. And what you are saying is what you're asking is a very valid question because of that. But parliamentarians need to realize, right, our responsibility is primarily not to our party, it's to the country. It's to create stability. That is our primary responsibility. Therefore, we must have a consensus on that. You see, the challenge is, right, I don't believe in just now talking about individuals, right? Individuals, we really need to stabilize the system. There is a challenge to the system, right? It's not just the challenge to the executive, it's a challenge to the legislature. It can become a challenge to the judiciary of this country, right? And we mustn't let it go there. We all want a democratic way of life. We want a rule-based system. We want a system in which, right, law is upheld. We want a system, we want to move away from a majoritarianism that has led us to this mess, to a country which recognizes all its citizens, irrespective of who they are or their birth, of being equal citizens. That's what this struggle has shown, and we have to get this country there. And we want leaders who are willing to lead in that direction. If people are unwilling to lead in that direction, we have to take notice of that now. These are the changes that are needed in taking this country forward.
Mr. Wickramaratne, I believe you agree with me when I say that Sri Lankans are always behind on a lot of matters when it comes to bringing in reforms. It's always a case of too little done, too late. We see the events that are happening right now in Sri Lanka, and we remember that similar things happened back in the day as well. When the Single Only Act was brought, the president at the time was murdered actually by almost the same people who brought him into power. So we're playing the same role on a repeat. But every time we play this role on a repeat, we are worse off than the previous time, because every other country in the world has moved forward. Back in the day, we would have been maybe in a high-rated country, but we would have fallen somewhere in the middle. But today, we have hit rock bottom, and we really can't expect this thing to play out again. So how confident are you in the parliament or the new government, or even after an election, a new government that is appointed, to be able to bring these reforms fast, without just, keeping them shelved and waiting until the people forget about all of that?
Shalan, my generation has failed this country, but your generation is not going to fail this country. There are lots more younger people. This Arugale was led by young people. They are more globalized. They see what's happening around the world. And Shalan, 25 years ago, we did not have 3 million Sri Lankans living overseas and working overseas. They are one of the biggest national assets we have. They are also desiring for the changes in this country. They are supporting their families down here. And therefore, I am more optimistic, right, with what has happened now for the better, and very much more optimistic with the next generation that they want the changes. So what looked impossible 60, 70 years ago, and the mistakes that we made 60, 70 years ago, we have to face up to it, and we have to get out of it. And we have to basically move the country forward. We have to have a democratic country, a country based on rule of law, and where citizens are equal, nothing else. Shalan, I did not choose, Shalan, right, to be born in this country. I was born and I was told it was Sri Lanka. I did not choose to be born to a particular race. I was later told, your race is being a Sinhala. I did not choose any of these things. Why are we holding people responsible for things that they didn't choose? We have an enlightened generation. Everybody is equal. Everybody must be given equal opportunity. We have to create a merit-based system. What a mess we have with this political system. We are sending people even to parliament who are basically not suitable for that particular job. Therefore, I am more optimistic, Shalan, but let's not let anybody give an excuse and delay. These reforms must happen now.
Definitely, Mr. Wickramaratne. Thank you very much for joining us on our show. Of course, none of us chose to be born in Sri Lanka, but we were born in this beautiful nation, and it is our duty to ensure that this nation is preserved for future generations as well. Let's work together as one country to get us out of this mess. There is always hope. Thank you very much, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, for joining us on our show. Thank you very much for all of our viewers for tuning in. Take care until we meet again, and God bless.